Hey, this is Ihab. In this video, I am going to show you how to create map projection. This is one of the examples that one of the students created. This is basically um, implemented using only one image, but using planes to block the exposure of the light, or basically the shadow that is cast on those solids. It would give you the feeling that it's actually created in 3D. Such objects that are very close would really show very obviously. So you can block those with also other planes, and instead of making it a disadvantage, you in fact make it more of an advantage because it looks nicely placed in the scene and in a very realistic way. So if this was not blocked with solids, it would have been very problematic. Here's another example. It was pushed further and to the point where it breaks. You can see some of the issues with the exposure, double exposure of certain images. But this is the After Effects class reel, so I'm showing other stuff accidentally there. So you can see here this area, but you can see that she did a really good job. You can see the balconies here. These are basically using multiple planes in there. These pots as well. In this example, he used the wine bottle. The shadow is not really looking great, or at least it's not showing great. Maybe, a little bit more blending, maybe a better choice of the wine bottle to make it blend better, especially with the coloration of it. Maybe it needs some adjustments. But this is basically what we do. Using only one image, we create the feeling that there is a big room. And you can see in this example how deep this effect would go. Same thing with this, even though it was using, you can see the low resolution here and all that, but it still gives the feeling of all that dimension that is created. So let's dig into it in After Effects. There is this website that is really helpful, especially if you do digital matte painting. It's a treasure actually. So if you go to unsplash.com, you get to use all of these images, whatever images that you want, and you can even use it for commercial uses. And all you have to do is just to credit the artist. I used this image for the effect that we're going with the map projection because it's ideal, almost ideal. Of course, it has some issues such as these strings or lines, but it's really good because it's blocked in a way that we can cover it with a wall on the left, a wall on the right, and maybe a wall for this curvature. It might work out. We'll see how it's gonna go. So I got this image from unsplash.com. I'll start by using two views. On this view, I am going to use the 3D custom view. So I'm gonna go here and make this image into the 3D, and then go to custom view 1. Next, I'm going to create a new camera. And then here, I'm going to use camera 1. I am going to select on the camera, hit P for position, select the position dimensions here or coordinates, Control C, click on the solid, Control V. So basically I am copying the position coordinates and pasting them on that image because I want it to be exactly in front of the camera, not so far away from it. Then if I go to scale, I can scale down that image. I'm going to make a teeny tiny scale of it that is in front of the camera. Next, I'm going to create a solid that's going to block the visuals from me, and we're gonna go from there. But before that, let me create a light. The light has to be point light. It has to be white. It has to be intensity of at least 100%, and I would keep it for 100%. And also, shadow diffusion, it has to be on 0, and a must is the cast shadow. The same thing, hit Control V, and it's gonna put it exactly where the camera is. And next I'm going to create a new solid, Control Y, it has to be white, then hit OK, make it in 3D, double A. This is what I need to have. On accept shadows, I need to have it on. On accept lights, I'm gonna have it off. Sometimes it might help to toggle into only, accept shadows only, but ultimately we're going to put it on. So remember, on and off. So this is our start point. We have a camera and a light inside it, just like projectors. A light inside it, and then it's going to transmit the visuals as it shines the light through that image. So if I go select on the image that I would like to project, hit double A, it has to cast shadows, and then light transmission has to be 100%. So it seems like it is not close enough to block all the shadow. Okay, that looks okay. So now it's projecting those visuals on the wall. Just like in projectors, we have to have something that receives the transmission of the visuals. All right, so now that we have things all set up, next we need to build the walls, or what you could think of as the shadow blockers. So I'm going to select on this object. I'm going to duplicate it, and then before I move it, I am going to change the anchor point to the side. Okay. And before I move this, I am going to name it as LT left wall. Then I'm going to duplicate it again, and I'm going to name this right wall, because if you moved it, then the pivot point would only be usable for one wall. So if you duplicate it right away, you would have another wall that is ready for you to move. So I'm going to select on the right wall, hit V to go to selection tool, then I would zoom in here. This is where the line is, and then I am going to go to rotate, and I would like to rotate it on the Y. You can see how the shadow is reacting to the plane movement. And now if you go and select on the left wall, move it around, Is it where I want it to be? You can take the rotation here, and if you want you can do something equivalent to the other side, if it was of course supposed to be having an equivalent number, but that all depends on the image and how it should be done. Now we're seeing only the lines or the kind of the frame of those solids. Through this, we're only seeing through the camera that is seeing the main image. So now that we used the camera to position both light and the transmitted image, now we can go and use the camera tool to zoom in and start seeing things in 3D. This is the image that we used originally, and now we can see this as a box to see if it's working out or not, and we're going to later apply some movement here with the camera. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to duplicate this, create ceiling and ground, and then we'll see how things are going to go. Alright, so now that I have this whole box, I would be able to have the effect working out properly. Just keep the following in mind when you are doing the map projection process. The image that we're projecting must cast shadow in the attributes of it. You must have the light must be white and it must cast shadow, and there should be 0 shadow diffusion. Just remember that shadow diffusion is actually available when you double click. This is the shadow diffusion. Keep it on 0. And the solids that we block the light transmission on must have the accept shadow yes, accept lights no, such as the following: accept shadows on, accept lights off. Also the image, in case you forgot, the image that we are projecting the visuals from must have, let me unfold all of these. Okay, this image here, go to the material options, keep in mind that light transmission must be 100%. Okay, so now in order for me to do the effect, I could zoom in with this camera. You can see the box now. And depending on the effect that you want to create, you could zoom in and out. So if I were to go with the camera, I'm going to key the camera, create some animation with the camera, and then I'm going to RAM preview that. So the RAM preview was taking too long, and I thought I could just render the whole thing out. And here is the final result that I got. So you can see it feels a little bit too warped as we go all the way to the roof, because you get to see the illusion of the effect. And even that being said, even that, we're still getting some really nice three-dimensional effect that could really work out. But of course, I am pushing the limits as I go down, and we get to see this curve here more further, and that's because I got too close to these corners, and this room is kind of small, so at least the setup of it is small, so it makes the illusion a little bit easier to kind of see. But you can see I have seamless cuts between the planes, and you can work out really big movements using this technique. You can see if you go back and forth, you can see these are going warped and sort of stretched. But of course, you don't really see that in the actual movement. I'll show you some of the other good examples that I had from my students. These are really interesting, and I really like how the result of it came out. I have 3 really good, interesting examples. The image is not really that sharp, and one of the things that she placed here, that this was by Jennifer, she placed this object, and I think the movement was a little bit too much, and at least maybe either the movement or maybe the placement of the box is not really accurate in there, but still it's almost seamless in the scene. Another very good example here by Grant. And I believe that he could still push it further, but you can see if you go back and forth, you start seeing the warping maybe here, but technically you don't see that in the just normal movement. A part of the success he has here is that he blocked these pieces as well with planes, and you can see that just a little bit here where the light transmission is exposed into the plane behind it as well. But still, that was a really good implementation. You could definitely try and block such things as well. This was an example by Stephanie. So as you see some point of interest movement, you get to see the effect better, and it becomes more effective. She also placed this pot here. There's this example too. That was a very good implementation, very challenging. That was by Quincy. Whenever there is some sort of arcs that we're dealing with in map projection, it becomes very hard to make it seamless. And the warping is still looking acceptable, even though that was just a lot of pushing on the technique. So that was it. In terms of adding objects, you could either add an object and fake the shadow using the drop shadow effect and basic 3D to warp the shadow, or you could use a light. Basically that's the ideal case. Often we use the light from the projection and we apply a shadow. We create a shadow catcher just for that that object, so we can cast the shadow of the object. For instance, if it was here, then we would have a plane just to catch the shadow in there. Alright, so that was the map projection.